Poor Waitress helped an old woman every day, until Mafia Boss and his 4 gang members showed up. The fluorescent lights of the Sunset Diner hummed a tired, buzzing song that matched the ache in Emma Grayson's feet. At 24, she felt closer to 44. The diner, wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat in the grayest stretch of Clearwater Heights, was her entire world. It was a world that smelled of stale coffee, industrial bleach, and the faint, sweet odor of maple syrup baked into the cracked vinyl of the booth seats. Emma worked doubles. She worked them 6 days a week, and sometimes 7 when her coworker, Maria, needed someone to cover her kids' sick days. The morning rush bled into the lunch lull, which bled into the miserable dinner shift where the tips were thin and the customers were ghosts. Her life was a tally of exhaustion, but every morning, at precisely 9 o'clock, the little bell above the door would jingle, and a small, bright spot would walk in, Mrs. Moretti was quiet, always dressed in clean, pressed blouses that looked completely out of place in the sunset. She was frail, her hands spotted and trembling slightly as she held her teacup, but her eyes were clear and sharp. She had a quiet class that didn't belong in this neighborhood, a hint of an old-world elegance that had somehow shipwrecked here. Emma always saved her the corner booth, the one where the vinyl wasn't split open. The usual, "Mrs. M?" Emma would ask, already pouring the hot water. "Just the tea today, dear." "Thank you." Her voice was soft, with an accent Emma couldn't quite place. Emma would nod, but during her 10-minute break, she would quietly ladle some of the chicken soup from the pot, microwave it until it was steaming, and slide it onto the table. "You need to eat something, Mrs. M. It's on the house." "Mrs." Moretti would look at the soup, then at Emma, and her eyes would soften with a gratitude that felt heavier than the $1.50 the soup actually cost. Their routine extended beyond the diner. Twice a week, Emma used her meager grocery money to buy extra for Mrs. Moretti, a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, some eggs. She'd carry the bags to the older woman's small apartment, a few blocks away in a building that was only slightly less worn down than Emma's own. She'd walk her home after the morning tea, her arm linked through the older woman's. A small, defiant pair against the cracked pavement and the lingering stares of men on street corners. Emma did this even when her own reality was pressing in, threatening to suffocate her. She did it when the red-bordered envelope from her landlord was shoved under her door. The words "overdue rent" screaming at her in capital letters. She did it when she looked at the soles of her sneakers, worn so thin she could feel the cold of the pavement through the rubber. She'd tape them with duct tape, hidden under the laces, and keep moving. The exhaustion was a heavy coat she couldn't take off, but she refused to let it make her cruel. Kindness was the only currency she had left, and she spent it freely on the one person who seemed as lonely as she was. Her kindness, however, made her a target. "Morning, sweetheart." Emma didn't have to look up from the coffee pot to know who it was. Curtis Lyle slid onto a stool at the counter, his greasy denim jacket scraping the formica. He was a low-level thug who thought he was a king, preying on the weak and the scared. He had a reputation for extortion and petty theft, and he seemed to think he owned this particular block. "What do you want, Curtis?" Emma kept her back to him, wiping the counter. "Just some friendly conversation and a coffee, black." He leaned forward, dropping his voice. "You know, I'm looking out for this neighborhood, making sure everyone's protected. A pretty girl like you, working all these hours. It's a shame. I can take care of myself. Can you?" He chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "I hear things. I hear your landlord's getting impatient. I could talk to him, smooth things over. You just have to be nice to me." Emma turned, her eyes flashing. The implication hung in the stale air, thick and dirty. "I'm not interested. Curtis, pay for your coffee and get out." "Tough girl." He smiled, showing a row of yellowed teeth. "We'll see how long that lasts. I always get what I want." He was a constant, itchy presence. A reminder that the world was full of men who took what they wanted, but the real confrontation, the one that changed everything, happened 2 days later. It was a Tuesday morning. The diner was half full, Mrs. Moretti was at her usual booth, digging in her old leather purse for her tea money. Curtis Lyle came in, flanked by two other men Emma didn't recognize. He saw Mrs. Moretti, saw the open purse, and his eyes lit up with predatory opportunity. He strode over to the booth. Well, Grandma, looks like you're doing all right for yourself. He sneered. Mrs. Moretti looked up, startled, clutching the purse to her chest. Please, I don't want any trouble. Trouble's just my middle name. Curtis reached out and yanked the purse. The old woman cried out, a thin, terrified sound as the strap bit into her arm. Something inside Emma snapped. It wasn't thought. It was pure, primal instinct. Before she had processed what she was doing, she had crossed the diner in 3 long strides. Get your hands off her, Emma yelled. Curtis turned, surprised, a smirk on his face. Or what, sweetheart? You gonna pour coffee on me? He tugged the purse again. Harder. Mrs. Moretti whimpered. Emma slapped him. The sound was like a gunshot in the small diner. It echoed off the tile walls. Every customer froze. Curtis's head snapped to the side, a bright red handprint already blooming on his sallow cheek. He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief, which quickly hardened into pure malice. He raised his hand, his fist clenching. You little... I'm calling the cops! Curtis! Emma yelled, grabbing the diner's landline from the counter. Her hand was shaking, but her voice was rock solid. Assault and robbery! Get out! Get out now! Curtis looked at the phone, then at the watching customers, then back at Emma. He was a bully, and bullies hated an audience. He slowly lowered his fist, his face burning with humiliation. You're dead, Emma, he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. He pointed a finger at her. You and the old lady, you're both dead. He shoved a chair out of his way and stormed out, his 2 lackeys following like nervous dogs. Emma's legs felt like jelly. She hung up the phone and rushed to Mrs. Moretti, who was trembling violently. It's okay, Mrs. M. He's gone. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They took a report with bored expressions. Curtis Lyle? One of them said, sighing. Yeah, we know him. Look, miss, unless he actually took something or hit you, it's just words. We can't do much. You should probably just try to stay out of his way. They left. Emma stood by the diner window, watching the patrol car drive off, a cold knot of dread settling in her stomach. She was alone. She had protected Mrs. Moretti, but in doing so, she had painted a target on both of them. She never saw the car. It was parked across the street and half a block down, angled perfectly to see the diner's entrance. It was a luxury black sedan, so clean it looked wet, a shark gliding through a sea of rusted-out hatchbacks and dented pickups. The windows were tinted so dark they reflected the gray sky like mirrors. Inside, the air was silent and cold, smelling of rich leather and something metallic. There were 4 men with the boss. His most trusted, Gino, was in the driver's seat, his eyes constantly scanning the street, his hands resting lightly on the wheel. Dante sat beside him, sharp and lean in a suit that cost more than Emma made in 6 months. In the back, Rico sat on one side, broad-shouldered and solid as a brick wall, his gaze fixed on the diner. Matteo, the youngest, sat on the other. In the center of the back seat, Luca Moretti ignored them all. At 36, Luca moved with a dangerous, deliberate calm. He wasn't looking at the diner. He was reading a letter, the heavy, cream-colored paper a stark contrast to his dark, impeccably tailored suit. The letter was from an old contact, a man who still owed him a favor from a life Luca had supposedly left behind. The message was short, the handwriting elegant. They know who she is. They think she's your weakness. They're circling. She's exposed. Luca folded the letter slowly, the crease sharp and precise. He looked up just in time to see the 2 police officers walk out of the Sunset Diner, shrugging. He watched them get in their car and drive away, leaving the girl standing in the window. He watched her turn back to his mother. Her shoulders slumped for a second in defeat before she visibly straightened them, returning to the old woman's side. That's him, Gino said from the front, his voice a low rumble. Curtis Lyle, the one who just left. He's the one who's been running his mouth. Luca said nothing, He watched Emma wipe down the table, her movements mechanical, her face pale but set. He saw the faint tremor in her hands. He had come back to Clearwater Heights, this place he had sworn to forget, to handle a threat to his mother. He had expected to find low-life scum like Lyle. He had not expected to find a 24-year-old waitress with worn-out shoes and more courage than an entire squad of armed men. That night, Emma stayed late, scrubbing the floors with extra bleach, as if she could wash the greasy presence of Curtis Lyle out of the diner. It was almost 1 a.m. when she finally finished, locking the cash register and counting the meager tips. She was bent over, shoving her apron into her bag, when the bell above the door jingled. Her heart leaped into her throat. She spun around, grabbing the closest thing, a wet cleaning rag. A man was standing just inside the door. "We're closed," she yelled, her voice high with adrenaline. "I swear to God, if you're drunk, you need to get out right now before I call the cops again." The man didn't move. He wasn't drunk. He was immaculate. He wore a dark wool overcoat that fell to his knees, perfectly tailored. He wasn't disheveled or loud or threatening. He was just there, silent. He was tall, with dark hair cut short and a face that looked like it had been carved from hard stone. His eyes were the most arresting part, dark, unreadable, and currently fixed on her. He looked around the empty diner, his gaze sweeping over the cracked booths, the humming soda machine, the cheap linoleum. He didn't look like he belonged here. He looked like he belonged on a different planet. "I said we're closed," Emma repeated, her voice weaker this time. He was making her nervous, but not in the same way Curtis did. Curtis was a stray dog, all noise and unpredictable bites. This man was a wolf, silent and assessing. He looked back at her, at the wet rag she was holding like a weapon. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, passed through his eyes so quickly she thought she'd imagined it. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the counter, his polished leather shoes making almost no sound on the tile. He reached into his coat, and for a terrifying second, Emma thought he was reaching for a gun. Instead, he pulled out his wallet. He extracted a single bill and laid it flat on the counter. It was a $100 bill. Emma stared at it. It was more than she made in 2 days. What is this for?" The man's gaze held hers. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging her question, but he offered no answer. He didn't reveal who he was. He didn't say what he wanted. He just turned, walked back to the door, and disappeared into the night. Emma stood there for a full minute, her heart hammering. She looked at the $100 bill, then at the empty doorway. She ran to the door and looked out. The street was empty. No car, no man. Just the whispering wind and the flickering yellow streetlights. The next morning, she went to Mrs. Moretti's apartment before her shift, the $100 bill tucked into her pocket, a cold sense of dread overriding the confusion. She found Mrs. Moretti sitting in her small kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, staring at her own front window. It was shattered. A rock lay on the worn carpet in the living room, surrounded by a spiderweb of glass. "Mrs. M?" Emma whispered. The old woman looked up, her face pale and drawn. She tried to smile, but it was a frightened, brittle thing. "Just some local boys, dear, a prank. It's nothing. This wasn't a prank. Mrs. M, this was Curtis." Emma's hands clenched into fists. This was the message. This was the follow-through on his threat. "Don't you worry, dear, it will be fine." "Mrs., Moretti said, her voice thin. "I'll fix this," Emma promised, her voice fierce. She grabbed the dustpan and broom, her mind racing. "I'm going to get some wood from the hardware store and board this up. I'll fix this." As Emma swept up the glass, she didn't see the black sedan parked at the end of the block, half hidden by an overgrown alley. She didn't see the man in the back seat, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury, his phone pressed to his ear. "Gino," Luca Moretti said, his voice dangerously quiet as he watched Emma trying to tape a piece of cardboard over the broken glass. "Find Curtis Lyle. Find him now, and bring him to me." The broken window was a black, jagged mouth that seemed to swallow all the warmth in Mrs. Moretti's small apartment. Emma had boarded it up with plywood from the hardware store, but the cold still seeped in. And so did the fear. Curtis Lyle did not forget his humiliation. He and his two shadows began a campaign of quiet terror. They didn't break anything else, but they were always there. When Emma arrived for her morning shift at the Sunset Diner, they would be leaning against the laundromat next door, smoking cigarettes, their eyes following her as she unlocked the door. When she walked, Mrs. Moretti home. They would be sitting on the steps of the apartment building, forcing the two women to squeeze past their outstretched legs. They never touched them. They just watched. Curtis would stroll into the diner during the lunch rush, sit at the counter and order nothing. He'd just spin a sugar packet on the counter, staring at Emma, a greasy smile on his face. The other regulars, the few families and old-timers who still ate there, began to drift away, the atmosphere too thick with unspoken menace. "You owe me, sweetheart," Curtis would say, his voice just loud enough for the closest tables to hear. "You cost me respect, and on this block, respect is currency. You and your old lady friend. You got a debt to pay." Mrs. Moretti stopped coming to the diner. She stayed locked in her apartment, and when Emma brought her groceries, she would only open the door a crack, her eyes wide with fright. "He's just a coward, Mrs. M," Emma insisted, her own voice sounding thin. "He's all talk. Men like him?" "Mrs." Moretti whispered, her hand trembling as she took the milk. "They are like rats. They chew at the foundations until the whole house falls down. Be careful. Emma, please." Emma's patience, worn thin by exhaustion and fear, finally snapped on a bright Thursday afternoon. She was on her break, walking to the corner market, when she saw Curtis and his men harassing Mr. Petrov, the elderly owner of the shoe repair shop. They had knocked over a rack of polished shoes, and Curtis was holding the old man by the front of his apron, demanding protection money. The street was full of people, but they all walked by, heads down, pretending not to see. Emma saw. "Let him go, Curtis." Her voice cut through the afternoon noise. Curtis turned, surprised to see her alone, without the shield of the diner or the old woman. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well, look who it is. Little Miss Hero, you come to pay Mr. Petrov's bill for him?" He shoved the old man aside and sauntered toward her. "Or maybe you're finally ready to pay your own. I'm not paying you anything. You're a pathetic bully, and everyone on this street knows it. Leave him alone. Leave all of us alone." She was standing her ground, but her heart was a trapped bird against her ribs. "You've got a big mouth, Emma," he sneered, his eyes dropping to her worn-out sneakers. "A real big mouth for someone who's got nothing." He lunged, grabbing her arm, his fingers dug into her bicep, hard and pinching. "I told you I always get what I want, and right now, I want you to shut up," Emma cried out, trying to twist away, but his grip was like iron. The few people watching from a distance scattered, disappearing into doorways. She was alone with him. A sound split the air, not a shout, not a siren, but the high-pitched, expensive scream of performance tires braking on pavement. A black sedan, the same one from the other night, had screeched to a halt in the middle of the street, its engine a low, predatory growl. It was so out of place here it looked like a spaceship. The driver's door opened. Luca Moretti stepped out. He didn't slam the door. He closed it with a soft, heavy thud. He was not wearing the overcoat now. He was in a dark, perfectly fitted suit, the white of his shirt blindingly crisp. He looked at Curtis's hand on Emma's arm, and his face, which had been unreadable before, settled into an expression of absolute Arctic calm. Gino and Dante stepped out of the other doors, silent as shadows, and simply stood by the car, watching. Curtis froze. His grip on Emma's arm went slack. He was a street thug, but he was not stupid. He knew power when he saw it, and this was not the power of a cheap bully. This was the power of money and violence on a scale he couldn't comprehend. Luca took 3 slow steps onto the sidewalk. He stopped about 5 feet from them. He didn't look at Emma. His eyes were locked on Curtis. "Let her go," he said. His voice was not loud. It was quiet, perfectly level, and carried a chilling lack of emotion. Curtis, trying to reclaim his bravado, puffed out his chest. "Who the hell are you? This ain't your business, pal." Luca tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity, as if he were studying an insect. "You have a choice. You can take your hand off her. You can pick up that man's shoes, and you can disappear. Or you can stay here, and I will remove your hand from her arm, and then I will remove you from this street. Permanently." The air crackled. Curtis's two men had gone pale, edging away from their boss, the way Luca said permanently. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, a medical diagnosis. Curtis looked at Luca's dark, unwavering eyes, then at the two mountains in suits standing by the car. He saw his entire, petty kingdom crumbling in the shadow of a true king. He dropped Emma's arm as if it were on fire. "Pick them up," Luca said, nodding toward the scattered shoes, seething with a humiliation far worse than the slap in the diner. Curtis bent down, his hands shaking with rage. He shoved the shoes back onto the rack, his face burning a dark, blotchy red. "Now leave," Luca said. Curtis didn't need to be told twice. He rounded on his men, shoved one of them, and stormed down the street, disappearing around the corner. The street was silent. "Mister." Petrov had already scurried back into his shop. Emma stood on the sidewalk, rubbing her arm, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She was stunned, vibrating with leftover adrenaline. She looked at the man in the suit. It was him. The man who had left the $100 bill. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was different now. The ice was gone, replaced by a low, formal concern. Who are you?" Emma managed to ask, her voice trembling. Luca looked at her, his gaze finally settling on her face. He seemed to take in her flushed cheeks, her defiant eyes, the worn collar of her t-shirt. "I was just passing through," he said, the excuse so thin it was transparent. "I don't like men who mistake cruelty for strength. You were here the other night, at the diner." He gave a slight nod. "I like coffee." He looked at her arm, at the red marks left by Curtis's fingers. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, and then he was smooth again. "He won't bother you again. Not like that." Before she could ask another question, he turned, got back into the sedan, and the car pulled away, as silent and lethal as it had arrived. Emma was left on the sidewalk, her heart hammering, more confused and suspicious than ever. That evening, she found Mrs. Moretti in her kitchen, slowly stirring a pot of soup. The older woman seemed calmer than she had in days. "He's gone," Emma said, helping her set the table. "Curtis, I don't think he's coming back." She told her what had happened. She described the black car, the men in suits, and the quiet, dangerous man who had made Curtis Lyle back down with just a few words. "Mrs." Moretti stopped stirring. She set the spoon down with a trembling hand and sank into a kitchen chair, her face a mask of old, deep sorrow. "Mrs. M. What is it? Do you know him?" "No, dear, not him," she whispered, looking at her hands. "But I know the type of man. I knew one. A long time ago." She looked up, her eyes fogged with memory. "I had a son, my Luca. He was a good boy, so smart, so strong. He loved this neighborhood, but he wanted more. He wanted to protect us, to give us everything." Emma listened, her blood turning to ice. "Luca. He got involved with powerful people." "Mrs." Moretti continued, her voice breaking. "He built an empire, thinking it would keep us all safe. But that world, it doesn't build. It only destroys. The danger became too great. His enemies began to see me, his family, as a weapon to use against him. So he did the only thing he could." "What did he do?" Emma asked, though she already knew. "He left. He cut himself off from us. He disappeared, so that his shadow would no longer fall on my doorstep. He broke my heart to keep me safe." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "That man who saved you today? He sounds like my son. Someone powerful. Someone who thinks violence can solve problems." Emma was silent. The man who liked coffee. The man who had left $100. The man who had just saved her. Luca. It couldn't be. He started coming to the diner. It began 2 days later. He walked in at 3 in the afternoon. During the dead time between lunch and dinner, he sat in the corner booth, Mrs. Moretti's booth, Emma, wiping down the counter, froze. "Just a coffee," he said, not looking up from the street. She poured it, her hand steady by sheer force of will. She set it down in front of him. "That'll be $1.50. He didn't seem to hear her. Just watch the street, his face unreadable, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. He sat for an hour, drank the coffee, and then stood. He left a $50 bill on the table. "I can't accept this," Emma called after him. "It's a tip," he said, not turning around, and walked out. He came back the next day. Same time, same booth, same order, another $50 bill. The third day, he spoke. "That man," he said, stirring his coffee. "Curtis Lyle, and he's been gone?" "Yes," Emma said warily, holding the coffee pot like a shield. "Does the landlord here? Or at your friend's building? Do they cause trouble? Collect debts that aren't owed?" His questions were subtle, but they were surgically precise. "We manage," Emma said stiffly. "You shouldn't have to manage," he replied, his eyes finally lifting to meet hers. They were dark, and for the first time, she saw something other than ice in them. It looked like exhaustion. "A woman like you shouldn't have to fight so hard for a little peace." "A woman like me?" Emma snapped, her suspicion and frustration boiling over. "You don't know anything about me, and I don't know anything about you, except that you scare bullies and you throw money around. Who are you?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable again. "I'm just a man having a coffee." "No, you're not." She was angry now. Angry at the fear she had lived with. Angry at this man for sweeping in with his quiet power and his mysterious money, disrupting her life just as much as Curtis had. "You're the man Mrs. Moretti's son became, aren't you?" His hand stilled on the cup. He didn't confirm it, but his silence was an answer. "She thinks you're gone," Emma whispered, her anger deflating into a sudden, aching sadness. "She thinks you left to protect her. She doesn't even know you're here. And it's better if she doesn't," Luca said, his voice hard. "My presence here puts her in more danger, not less. I came back to handle a threat, that's all. So you're just going to sit here, in her booth, and drink coffee, and then what? Disappear again? I'm handling it." He stood, leaving another $50 on the table. "Stay away from the alleys after dark. Emma, the rats are still rats, even when the cat is watching." His warning proved true 3 nights later. Emma's shift ended late, just after midnight. The alley behind the diner was the fastest way to her bus stop. She usually hurried through it, keys clutched between her fingers. She was halfway down the narrow, brick-lined canyon when a figure stepped out from behind the dumpster, blocking her path. It was Curtis. His face was bruised, and his eyes were wild with a mix of fear and rage. "You!" he hissed, spitting on the ground. "You and your fancy boyfriend. You think you run this town? You ruined me. He ruined me. Get out of my way, Curtis. He's not here to save you now, is he?" Curtis lunged, grabbing her, and shoved her hard against the graffitied brick wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. He pressed his forearm against her throat. "You're gonna pay for what you did. You're gonna—" A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the alley. It wasn't a shadow. It was Luca. He had been there all along, watching. Curtis didn't even have time to turn. Luca moved with a speed that was terrifying. He grabbed Curtis by the collar, ripped him away from Emma, and slammed a single, brutal punch into his stomach. Curtis folded with a wet gasp. Luca didn't stop. He spun him around and smashed his head against the brick wall with a sickening thud. Curtis slumped to the pavement, groaning, a crumpled heap of denim and rage. Luca stood over him, breathing hard, his suit jacket unruffled. He looked down at the man, his face a mask of cold contempt. He then looked at Emma, who was leaning against the wall, trying to catch her breath, her whole body shaking. "He won't touch you again," Luca said. It was a promise. It was a verdict. The adrenaline receded, and a hot, wild anger took its place. Emma pushed herself off the wall. "Is that how you solve everything?" she yelled, her voice echoing in the narrow alley. "You just punch it until it stops moving? You hit him. You almost killed him." He put his hands on you, Luca said simply, as if that explained everything. And you put your hands on him. What makes you different? Because you wear a more expensive suit? You're just like him. You're a violent, dangerous man. She was trembling, not just from fear, but from a profound, terrifying disappointment. She took a step back from him. Stay away from me. Stay away from your mother. You're not protecting anyone. You're just bringing your world right to our doorstep. She turned and ran from the alley, not looking back to see him standing there, his fists still clenched at his sides, as she stumbled onto the lighted street. His voice followed her, quiet but carrying. You shouldn't be walking home alone. It stopped her. She hated him for being right. She hated him for making her feel unsafe and then acting as her savior. She didn't look back. She just ran for the bus stop. For 2 days, the diner was quiet. Luca did not come. There was no sign of Curtis or his men. The silence was almost as unnerving as the threats had been. On the 3rd day, Emma arrived for her 6 o'clock morning shift. The diner was dark and smelled of bleach. Sitting on the clean counter, right next to the cash register, was a small, simple bouquet of white flowers. They looked like wildflowers, delicate and out of place. Tucked into the stems was a small, white card. There was no name, just 4 words, written in a strong, clear hand, for the bravest waitress in town. Emma picked up the card, her fingers tracing the ink. She knew who it was from. She hated that her heart, which had been so full of anger, felt a sudden, confusing flutter of warmth. The whispers started the day after Curtis Lyle disappeared. They traveled faster than the bus line, spreading from the laundromat to the pawn shop, over the counter at the Sunset Diner, and through the thin walls of the apartment buildings. Curtis had been found. He was discovered by the sanitation workers at 4 a.m, dumped in the alley behind the pawn shop. He was alive, but only just. His face, once defined by a greasy sneer, was now a ruin of swollen, purple flesh. He had 2 broken arms, 3 shattered ribs, and a reputation that had evaporated overnight. Clearwater Heights was a neighborhood that understood violence. It was used to the petty cruelty of men like Curtis. This was different. This was not a street fight. This was a professional, systematic dismantling. It was a message. The regulars at the diner spoke in hushed tones. The police, they said, had asked a few questions and left. They were as scared as everyone else. The consensus was clear. The power vacuum left by the old gangs was being filled. Someone new was in town. Someone organized, ruthless and quiet. Emma felt the shift in the air. The men on the corners no longer whistled at her. They looked away, their eyes darting to the shadows. The fear in the neighborhood was thicker, colder, and she knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in her stomach, that the small bouquet of wildflowers on her counter was from the man who had brought this new fear. The new power dynamic brought new predators. One rainy afternoon, Emma arrived at Mrs. Moretti's apartment to find the landlord, Mr. Henderson, knocking aggressively on the old woman's door. He was a small, weasel-faced man who always smelled of sour milk and cheap cigars. "Mrs. Moretti, I know you're in there," he was yelling. "Mr. Henderson, what's wrong?" Emma asked. Stepping between him and the door, he turned, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, it's you. What's wrong is the element you're attracting. Miss Grayson, this building is for decent, quiet folk." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the beating that thug Lyle took. I'm talking about the rumors. Dangerous people are moving in, and they seem to have an interest in this apartment." He gestured vaguely to the boarded-up window. "For safety reasons, I'm afraid I'm going to have to terminate Mrs. Moretti's lease, effective in 48 hours. Emma's blood ran cold. "You can't do that. She has nowhere to go." "It's illegal. It's a month-to-month lease. Sweetheart, I can do whatever I want." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Now, I might be convinced to overlook the safety concerns if, say, Mrs. Moretti were willing to contribute a little more. A hazard fee, say, an extra $300 a month, in cash." It was extortion, plain and simple. He was using the fear Luca had created to line his own pockets. "You're disgusting," Emma spat. "I'm a businessman," Henderson sneered. "You tell her. 48 hours or the money. Her choice." He pushed past Emma and stomped down the stairs. Emma found Mrs. Moretti trembling by the door. "He can't make me leave, can he, dear?" "No, Mrs. M. I won't let him. I'll figure something out," Emma promised, her mind racing. But she had no idea what to do. She had exactly $63 in her bank account. She was stewing in a toxic brew of rage and helplessness when she saw him at the diner later that day. Luca was in his usual booth, staring out the window, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He looked up as she approached, his dark eyes seeming to read her mind. "You look troubled," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Her landlord, he's trying to evict her. He says he's worried about safety. He wants $300 a month or she's out." Luca's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Men like Henderson are parasites. They feed on the fear of others. "He's only scared because of what you did to Curtis," Emma whispered, her voice fierce. "I did what was necessary, and now she's paying the price." Emma sagged, the fight going out of her. "I don't know what to do." Luca placed a few bills on the table for the coffee. "I can handle it." Emma looked at him, at his calm, capable face. She knew exactly what handling it meant. It meant a visit in the night. It meant Mr. Henderson ending up like Curtis, or worse. It meant solving one problem with a bigger, darker one. "No." He paused, his hand on the table. "No, no," she repeated. Stronger this time. "I don't want you to handle him. I don't want you breaking his arms or threatening his family. Violence isn't the only way. Luca, that's what you don't understand. That's the problem." He stood, towering over her, his shadow falling across the table. "And what is your way, Emma? Talking, pleading? Do you think a parasite like Henderson understands reason? He only understands fear." "I'll find another way," she insisted, though she had no idea what it was. "I'll call legal aid. I'll start a fund for her. I won't let you drag us into your world." He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze intense, as if he were trying to dissect her. He seemed frustrated, perhaps even impressed. "Your way," he said, his voice flat. "We'll get you both thrown on the street." He left the diner, leaving her alone with the smell of stale coffee and the crushing weight of her own powerlessness. That night, Emma's apartment felt colder than usual. She sat at her small kitchen table, counting her tips. It was pathetic. Maybe enough for a week of groceries. Not enough to fight a landlord. Not enough to fix anything. She felt the exhaustion of her double shifts, but more than that, she felt a bone-deep loneliness. Her defiance in front of Luca felt foolish now. He was right. She had no power here. It was almost 2 a.m. The building was silent. Then she heard it. A scrape, not a knock. A metallic scrape at her door lock, just down the short hall from her kitchen. She froze. The hairs on her arms stood on end. She held her breath, listening. The building's old pipes groaned, but underneath that, she heard it again, a click. Someone was picking her lock. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her system. Curtis was in the hospital. This was someone new. Henderson? Had he sent someone? Or was it worse? She backed away from the table, her chair scraping quietly on the linoleum. Her eyes darted around the tiny apartment. No way out. The fire escape was outside the main room, right past the door. She grabbed the heaviest thing she owned, her one good kitchen knife, the one with the thick 8-inch blade. The lock on her door snapped. The sound was deafeningly loud, a crack of wood splitting. The door swung open, hitting the wall. Emma didn't scream. She couldn't. Her breath was trapped in her lungs. A large, dark figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. A man. Not Henderson, someone bigger. Emma scrambled backward, fumbling for the light switch. Her hand hit it, flooding the small room with harsh, yellow light. The man was wearing a dark hoodie and gloves. He saw her and started to move. She ran. Her only thought was to hide. She dove into the tiny bedroom and yanked open the closet door, squeezing inside and pulling the louvered door shut. She crouched in the dark, surrounded by the smell of her old sneakers and cedar, her body trembling so violently she was sure he could hear it. She held the knife in front of her, her knuckles white, her other hand clamped over her mouth to stifle the sobs. She heard his footsteps, heavy, deliberate. He walked through the main room. He was in the bedroom now. He was searching. He stopped. Right outside the closet, Emma's world narrowed to the thin slat in the door, to the dark shape standing just on the other side. This was it. She was going to die here, in a closet, over nothing. The closet door was ripped open. A scream tore from her throat, a choked animal sound of pure terror. She lunged forward, thrusting the knife blindly with both hands. A hand, impossibly fast, caught her. It didn't grab the blade. It clamped around both her wrists. Atiam, stopping her momentum instantly. The grip was like steel. Emma! The voice was not the intruder's. It was low, rough, and gut-wrenchingly familiar. Luca! He stood in the frame of her closet, his other hand still on the door he had torn open. He wasn't the intruder. He was the intruder. No. The knife clattered to the floor as her hands went limp. The terror, finding no release in a fight, collapsed inward. Her legs gave out. She didn't faint, she simply fell apart. Luca caught her before she hit the floor. He pulled her out of the closet and into his arms, his body shielding her as if the threat were still there. He didn't say anything. He just held her. She broke. A deep, shuddering sob tore through her, then another and another. It was the terror of the break-in, the fear of Curtis, the humiliation from the landlord, the exhaustion of her entire life. It all came pouring out. She clung to the front of his expensive jacket, her face pressed against his chest, and she wept. He sank to the floor, pulling her with him, his back against the wall. He held her locked against him, one arm wrapped tightly around her waist, the other hand tangled in her hair, pressing her head to his shoulder. He just let her cry, rocking her slightly, his body a solid, warm wall in the chaos of her apartment. How did you... She finally gasped, her voice muffled against his shirt. Your phone, he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. You sent an SOS text. I didn't send anything. I didn't even have time to unlock it. I put a number in your contacts last week, he admitted, his voice tight. Gino. He put a panic setting on your lock button. You must have hit it when you grabbed the knife. It sent a ping to my phone. I was already close. The violation of it, him planting a tracker on her, should have made her angry. But she was too broken, too tired, and too grateful to be alive, the man she had just seen. He wasn't here to talk. He's gone, Luca said. When I came through the door, he went out the fire escape. Dante is tracking him now. She shivered, a delayed reaction to the cold and the fear. Luca held her tighter. He waited until the last of the sobs quieted into trembling breaths. Then, he gently tilted her chin up. His eyes were dark, not with coldness, but with a raw, burning intensity. He looked at her tear-streaked face, at her mouth, at the terror still lingering in her eyes. He slowly brushed the damp hair back from her temple, his thumb grazing her skin. The touch was unexpectedly gentle, hesitant. You shouldn't have to be this strong alone, he whispered, his voice rough. It was not a platitude. It sounded like a confession, like an admission of his own failure to protect her. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle first kiss. It was fierce, almost violent, a desperate collision. His mouth claimed hers with a raw hunger, his lips firm and demanding. It was a kiss that tasted of anger, of possession, and of a profound, bottomless relief. He had almost been too late, and the kiss was his punishment and his reward. Emma, her mind still reeling, kissed him back. She clung to him, her hands grabbing his jacket, her fear and loneliness pouring into the kiss. It was a shared desperation, a drowning man finding a piece of wreckage. Then, just as quickly, the fierceness softened, the pressure of his mouth gentled, the kiss slowed, deepened, becoming something else entirely. It became tender, aching, his hand moving from her chin to cradle the back of her head, holding her as if she were made of fragile glass. He kissed her like he was memorizing her, his lips tracing hers with a reverence that undid her more than the passion. It was too much. The terror, the rescue, the intensity of his emotion. It was overwhelming. Emma put her hands flat on his chest and gently, reluctantly pushed. "Luca, I can't. It's too fast." He broke the kiss immediately, but he didn't let her go. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling against her hands. "I know," he said, his voice ragged. He stayed there, his forehead pressed to hers, sharing the same small space, the same air, until her trembling finally stopped. The next morning, Emma's apartment was a hive of activity. Luca was there, along with Gino and the young one, Matteo. They were not asking for permission. "This door is paper," Gino said, ripping the broken frame from the wall. Matteo was installing small, white sensors on her windows. "What are you doing?" Emma protested, clutching her coffee cup. She had barely slept. "We are securing the apartment," Luca said. He was in her kitchen, making coffee he had brought himself, as if he lived there. A solid core door, a new lock system, alarms on the windows, a camera for the hallway. "You can't just do this. This is my home. You're controlling." "I'm keeping you alive," he countered, his voice flat, turning to face her. The tenderness of the previous night was gone, replaced by the cool-eyed commander. "The man last night wasn't sent by Henderson. He was a professional. He was here to send me a message. They know I'm here, and they know I'm interested. You are a target now, Emma, whether you like it or not." She glared at him, frustrated and furious, but the fear from the closet was still too fresh. She knew he was right. She hated him for it, and she hated the small, traitorous part of her that felt, for the first time in her life, completely safe. A few days later, the rumors at the diner were replaced by a new, stranger one, Mr. Henderson had apparently had a change of heart. He had been seen running from Mrs. Moretti's building, his face sheet white. He had told another tenant he was retiring and moving to another state. The eviction notice was withdrawn. Emma knew Luca had handled it despite her wishes, but she was too relieved to argue. Her life settled into a strange new routine. She went to work. She checked on Mrs. Moretti, who was calmer now, but she felt eyes on her everywhere. She knew Gino's car was often parked a block from the diner, and Dante would shadow her walk to the bus stop. One afternoon, a man she had never seen before slid into her booth. He was older, with slicked back hair and a suit that was expensive but flashy, unlike Luca's quiet elegance. "Coffee and a slice of the apple pie," he said, smiling a little too wide. She brought it to him. "You're Emma," he said. Not a question. "You're the girl Luca Moretti is so fond of. He's making a lot of noise in this town. It's bad for business." Emma stiffened, her hand tightening on the coffee pot. "See, the old guard, they're not happy he's back. And we're not happy either. We hear you're close to him, very close." His eyes lingered on her. "We'd pay a great deal for information. Where he's sleeping, who his men are, what his plans are." He slid a thick white envelope across the table. "That's $20,000. Cash. Just for a conversation." Emma looked at the envelope. It was more money than she had ever seen. It was enough to get her and Mrs. Moretti out of Clearwater Heights forever. Enough to start a new life, far away from all of this. She looked at the man's slick, expectant smile. Then she slid the envelope back across the table. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice perfectly even. "And you'd better eat your pie before it gets cold." The man's smile tightened, the humor vanishing. "He's a ghost, sweetheart, a dead man walking. You don't want to be standing next to him when he falls." He stood, left a $20 bill on the table, and walked out. Emma picked up the envelope he had left behind. She walked to the kitchen, past the swinging doors, and dropped it straight into the trash can. Burying it under a pile of wet coffee grounds, the trash can in the diner's kitchen felt like a sealed vault, holding the $20,000 Emma had so calmly thrown away. Her refusal of the rival gang's offer was not an act of bravery. It felt, to her, like simple necessity. It was like refusing to set her own house on fire. She had no interest in being currency in a war she didn't understand. But her refusal had changed the air again, the protection from Luca's men. Once a subtle shadow became a near-constant, tangible presence. Gino's black sedan was always parked a block away when her shift ended. Dante, lean and sharp in his suit, would be reading a newspaper at the bus stop. She felt like a bird in a very expensive, very dangerous cage. She was safe from the wolves, but she was not free. Her curiosity about Luca, however, began to outweigh her frustration. She needed to understand the man who had kissed her with such desperate tenderness and who now commanded a small army in her neighborhood. She learned about his past not from him, but in fragments from the world he had built. She learned it from a quiet word with Gino, who, while waiting for her one evening, had the look of a loyal soldier. He didn't just leave, Gino said, his eyes on the street. He was exiled. The old bosses. They gave him a choice, give up his territory or go to war. He chose to walk away. He wouldn't risk his mother. He made an oath. He said he'd never bring this life to her door again. But he's here now, Emma pointed out. He's here, Gino agreed, his voice grim. Because they broke the truce first. They came for her. This knowledge reframed everything. He wasn't just a powerful man. He was a man who had already given up everything once to protect his mother. And now he was back, breaking his own sacred oath, and Emma was the reason his return had become so complicated. Their interactions began to change. The silent, watchful presence in the diner booth was replaced by something else. He started appearing in the early mornings, just as the sun was turning the gray streets of Clearwater Heights a pale, watery pink. She would be walking to her 6 o'clock shift, and he would just be there, falling into step beside her. He wasn't in his armor-like suits. He wore dark jeans and a simple, dark sweater, but he still looked impossibly out of place. A panther walking among pigeons. "You shouldn't be out this early," he'd say, his voice a low rumble in the quiet morning. "Neither should you. Don't you sleep?" she'd reply. "Not much." They would walk the few blocks to the diner in silence, but it was a different silence now, not the taut, watchful quiet of before, but something shared. He would wait outside, leaning against the wall until she unlocked the diner door. She would go in, start the first pot of coffee, and bring 2 cups out to the front step. She'd sit on the step, he would stand, and they would drink the diner's cheap, bitter coffee as the city woke up. He spoke little, but he would watch her, his gaze less of an assessment and more of a study. He watched her kindness to the first customers, the way she smiled at the sanitation workers. He was watching a life he could never have, a goodness he didn't think existed anymore. One night, the heavens opened. A late autumn storm swept through, turning the streets into black, reflective rivers. Emma's shift ended at midnight, and she stood under the diner's flickering awning, the rain coming down in sheets too thick to even run through. She was stranded. Gino's car was nowhere to be seen, likely handling other, darker business. She was alone. Then, a figure emerged from the deluge, a dark shape moving through the rain. It was Luca. He wasn't in a car. He was on foot, soaked to the skin. His dark hair plastered to his head, his black overcoat dripping. He had come for her. "You're going to get sick," was the first thing she said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the rain. "Gino and Dante are occupied," he said, stopping in front of her. He looked undone, the cold rain stripping away his careful layers of control. "I told you, you shouldn't walk alone. And you walking with me is supposed to be safer? You're a target. I'm a better shield than that umbrella you were about to grab," he said, nodding to the diner's broken courtesy umbrella. They looked at each other, the two of them trapped on a small island of dry concrete, the storm raging around them. "My apartment is closer than your car," Emma said, making a decision that felt both tiny and monumental. "Come on, you can wait it out." He hesitated for only a second, then nodded. She grabbed his hand, a shocking, impulsive gesture, and they ran. They sprinted through the flooded streets, the cold rain stealing their breath. They burst into her apartment building. shaking and laughing, the adrenaline of the run breaking the tension. Inside her small, clean apartment, the sound of the rain was a dull roar against the windows. The new, once solid core door locked behind them with a heavy, definitive thunk. I don't have any men's clothes, she said awkwardly, grabbing a towel from her linen closet. But this is dry. He took the towel, his fingers brushing hers. He wiped his face and ran the towel through his hair. His movements slow. The apartment was tiny. He filled it. "I'll make coffee," she said, needing something to do with her hands. As she busied herself with the kettle, he stood by the window, not looking at her, but at the rain-lashed street below. His jacket was off, leaving him in a dark Henley that clung to his shoulders. "Why?" he asked. His voice so quiet she barely heard him. "Why what? Why did you throw that envelope away? The $20,000. Gino told me about your visitor. You should have taken it. You could have been on a plane in an hour. You could have been free of all this. Of me." Emma stopped, the kettle whistling. She turned to face him. "And gone where? And done what? Run for the rest of my life? And what about your mother? Was I supposed to leave her here, with Henderson extorting her and rivals breaking her windows? She is not your responsibility." "Neither are you," Emma said softly. "I don't know how to live in your world. Luca, I don't know how to be the kind of person who takes money to betray someone, or who runs away when things get hard. I work at the diner. I pay my rent, and I help my friends." He turned from the window, his face etched with a profound, aching sorrow. "You make it sound so simple. It is simple. You're the one who makes it complicated." He walked toward her, stopping just feet away. "I haven't felt simple in 20 years, this life. It grinds you down. It takes everything. You forget what it's like to just be." He looked around her small, warm apartment. "I come here. I walk with you in the morning. I drink your terrible coffee." A small, ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And for 10 minutes, I forget what I am. I feel peace." The confession hung in the air, as raw and vulnerable as a fresh wound. Emma's heart ached for him, for the man he was, and the boy he must have been. "That's what I wanted you to feel," she whispered. "When I gave you the coffee, I just wanted you to feel like a person, not a boss." He took the final step, closing the distance between them. The rain hammered against the glass. He raised his hand, not to his gun, not to an enemy, but to her. He touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, his callous skin rough against her. "Emma," he breathed, his name a prayer, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss from the night of the break-in. This was a slow, deliberate claiming. It was a question and an answer. His lips were soft, searching, and he kissed her with an agonizing tenderness, as if he were starving and she was the first real food he had tasted in years. She melted into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel the steady, hard beat of his heart beneath her palms. The coffee was forgotten. The storm was forgotten. There was only the solid, warm presence of him. He deepened the kiss, his other arm sliding around her waist, pulling her flush against him. It was a kiss of unspoken confessions, of loneliness, of a desperate need to connect. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathless, their foreheads resting together. "You are the last good thing I have ever touched," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. She didn't speak. She just led him by the hand into her small bedroom. The room was lit only by the gray, stormy light from the window. They stood facing each other, the air electric. He unbuttoned his Henley, pulling it over his head, and Emma's breath caught. His chest and shoulders were a roadmap of his life. She had expected it, but seeing it was different. A long, puckered scar ran along his ribs. A small, circular divot was just above his heart. There were others, paler, older, ghosts of past battles. She stepped forward, her fear dissolving into a wave of compassion. She raised her hand and, with a touch so light it was barely there, traced the long scar on his side. He flinched, not from pain but from the gentleness of the touch. "Who did this?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter. "It was a long time ago," he said, his voice rough. He covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm flat against the scar. "They're just reminders. They're a part of you," she said, looking up at him. He looked down at her, his eyes dark with a mix of desire and a terrifying vulnerability. He kissed her again, his lips tracing a path from her mouth, along her jaw, down to the soft skin of her throat. He kissed her collarbone, his touch reverent, his breath warm. He kissed her like she was fragile, like she was made of spun glass and light, and he was a man of stone and darkness who was terrified to break her. He unbuttoned her waitress uniform slowly, peeling the layers of her life away, his hands shaking almost imperceptibly. He kissed the skin he revealed, his lips reverent. When she stood before him, she felt not exposed, but seen. He lifted her and carried her to the bed. He laid her down, his movements fluid and possessive, and followed, covering her body with his. He was heavy, solid, and safe. Their lovemaking was not a fire. It was an ocean. It was deep, emotional, and overwhelming. It was a desperate, tender collision of two worlds. It was his rough control meeting her soft strength. It was her hands exploring the hard planes of his back, and his mouth whispering her name against her skin. It was the release of all the tension, the fear, the loneliness, finding solace not in violence, but in a shared, quiet intimacy. It was two broken, solitary people, finding a desperate, fragile peace in each other's arms as the storm raged outside. The next morning, the storm had passed. A weak, watery sun filtered into the bedroom. Emma woke first, tangled in her sheets and in Luca's arms. He was still asleep, his face in repose, looking younger. The hard lines softened. She lay there, watching him, a quiet, dangerous hope blooming in her chest. The sound of a phone vibrating on the nightstand shattered the peace. Luca was awake instantly, his body tensing, the soldier returning. He grabbed the phone. "What?" he answered, his voice hard. He listened, his face turning to granite. "Where?" "I'm on my way." He hung up and was out of bed in one fluid motion, pulling on his clothes from the night before. "Luca, what is it?" Emma asked, sitting up, clutching the sheet to her chest. "It's Curtis," he said, his back to her as he buckled his belt. "He wasn't just found, he was recruited. He's joined the rival outfit, the ones who sent the man to your booth. He's been seen scouting your diner. He's planning retaliation." Emma felt a chill, but Luca wasn't finished. Gino and Dante just confirmed it. He turned to face her, and his eyes were cold again, the peace of the night completely gone. "That bastard who offered you the money? His crew has your name, and your photo. They're passing it around. They're not just targeting me anymore. They're targeting you." He snapped. The quiet man who felt peace was gone, replaced by the mafia boss. "Get dressed. Gino is 5 minutes out. You're going to a safe house. Now." "A safe house? What about my job? What about Mrs. Moretti?" "Forget your job. My men will get my mother. You are the one who is exposed." "No," Emma said, standing up, the sheet falling. "I'm not being locked away in some high-rise apartment while your mother is still in her building. She's a target too. Luca, I won't leave her." "You will do as I say," he roared, his voice bouncing off the small apartment walls. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice to her. "I'm trying to keep you alive, and I'm trying to keep her alive. Don't you see? If they know you care about me, they know you care about her. We have to get her. I have to be there. She trusts me." He grabbed her arms, his grip bruising, his face inches from hers, his eyes wild with a fear she had never seen. "You don't understand the rules. Emma, you don't understand what they will do to you to get to me. And you don't understand that I won't be one of your pawns," she yelled back, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. He let her go, turning away, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He looked like he wanted to punch the wall. He was breathing hard, fighting for control. "You make me weak," he said, his voice a low, strangled whisper of self-loathing. He turned back, his face a mask of anguish. "For 10 years, no one could touch me. I had no weaknesses. I had nothing to lose. And then I walked into your diner. And now you, my mother. You are all I can think about. A man in my position cannot afford to think. He can only act. You have made me weak." Emma stared at him, the anger draining out of her, replaced by a sudden, heartbreaking clarity. "Or maybe," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "I make you human." He flinched, as if she had slapped him. The words hit him harder than any bullet could have. He had no answer. The standoff was broken by a frantic pounding on the solid core door. Not Gino. Someone else. Emma. Her heart pounding, grabbed her robe. Luca pulled his gun from the back of his waistband, moving to the door in a low crouch. "Who is it?" he called. "It's me, Mr. Petrov," the old cobbler from next to the diner. His voice was shrill with panic. "Mr. Petrov, you must come. It's the old woman. It's Mrs. Moretti." Luca's blood ran cold. He yanked the door open. The old man was standing there, wringing his cap in his hands, his face pale. "They took her," he stammered. "Just now, I saw it from my window. A dark van. They grabbed her right off the street. They took her. Mr. Moretti, they took your mother." For a split second, the world stopped. Mr. Petrov's words, "They took her," hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. Then chaos. The man of cold, quiet calculation vanished, replaced by a barely contained animal fury. Luca shoved past the old cobbler, his phone already to his ear. "Gino, code black. My mother's apartment. Now, they have her." He was back in Emma's apartment in 2 strides, grabbing his jacket, his gun still in his hand. The tenderness of the night, the intimacy of the morning, had evaporated, leaving behind the hard, terrifying reality of his world. "You," he snapped at Emma. "You're not safe." "I'm not going to a safe house while they have her," Emma yelled, pulling on her sneakers, her hands shaking so hard she could barely tie the laces. "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. His eyes were not cold. They were burning. They were wide with a raw, visceral panic that terrified her more than his anger. He was losing control. "You're panicked, Luca. You can't think. You need me." Gino and Dante burst through the door, their faces grim. "Boss, the street is empty." A witness saw a black van. No plates. They were professionals. "Rivals," Luca spat, running a hand over his face. He was pacing Emma's tiny living room like a caged tiger. "The ones who sent the man to her booth. They knew. They knew I was back. They were watching." "They're trying to flush you out," Dante said, his voice low. "Force your hand. It's a trap." "I don't care," Luca said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "Find them. Use every contact. Burn every bridge. I want her back." For 2 hours, Emma's apartment became a war room. Luca was on the phone, his voice ablade, calling in favors, making threats, but every call was a dead end. The people who took her were not local. They were ghosts. Emma sat on her couch, watching him. He was a king with an army, and he was utterly powerless. The cold, calculating facade was back, but his eyes betrayed him. The panic was still there, banked like embers. They were hitting a wall. His contacts were too scared or too slow. Then she remembered. The slick-haired man. The envelope with $20,000. "We hear you're close to him. Very close." She stood up. "I can find her." Luca didn't look up from his phone. "Emma, not now." "I can find her." "Luca," she repeated, her voice cutting through the tension. He finally looked at her. "The man who offered me the money," she said, her voice steady. "He's arrogant. He thinks I'm just a scared waitress he can buy. He has no idea I threw that envelope away. He thinks I'm weak. He's the only lead we have." Luca's face hardened. "No, absolutely not. You are not going near him." "You don't have another option," she argued, stepping toward him. "Your way isn't working. They're looking for you. They aren't looking for me. I can walk right up to him. I'll tell him I've changed my mind. I'll tell him I'm terrified and I want the money, and I'll tell him whatever he wants to know. He'll get sloppy. He'll brag. He'll tell me where she is to prove he has her. He'll kill you, Emma." "That's what he'll do. He won't if he thinks I'm useful." She put her hand on his arm, forcing his clenched fist to relax. "You have to let me do this. You have to trust me." He stared at her. A silent, agonizing war playing out behind his eyes. He was a man who trusted no one, a man who controlled everything. And she was asking him to put the only two things he had left in the world, her and his mother, into the hands of fate. "Gino," Luca said, his voice hoarse. "Put a wire on her. Matteo, you're on the sniper post. Dante, you're the shadow. If he so much as breathes on her wrong, you take him. You take everyone." The meeting was set at a public park, a neutral space. Emma, her heart a trip hammer against her ribs, walked across the open field. She felt the tiny, cold disc of the wire taped between her shoulder blades. The slick-haired man, Sal, was sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons, as if it were a normal Tuesday. "You're late," he said, not looking up. I was scared," Emma stammered, twisting her hands. She let her voice tremble. "Is it true? What they're saying? Did you take her?" Sal finally looked up, his eyes cold and amused. "We took the old baggage. Yeah, Moretti's been making a mess. We're just cleaning it up. I want out," Emma whispered, the words she and Luca had rehearsed. "I don't care about him. I just want to be safe. You offered me money. I'll take it. I'll take the $20,000. I'll tell you whatever you want, where he's staying, how many men, anything, just get me out of here." Sal smiled, a slow, predatory expression. He bought it. He saw only a terrified, greedy girl. "See, I told you. Everyone has a price. You just had to be motivated." "Where is she?" Emma pushed, her voice cracking. "Is she okay? If I help you, you have to promise you won't hurt her." "She's fine," he scoffed, waving a hand. "She's collateral. We've got her tucked away at the old shipping warehouse, off Route 9. She'll stay there until her son decides to cooperate, or until we get tired of waiting." He had said it. He had given it to her. "Now," Sal said, leaning in, his smile vanishing, "you tell me. Where is he?" Before Emma could answer, a voice crackled in her ear, Luca's voice, broadcast from a speaker on Dante, who was stepping out from behind a large oak tree. "She's not telling you anything." Sal's head snapped up. He saw Dante. He saw Gino approaching from the other side. His face went pale. He had been played. Emma didn't wait. She turned and ran, just as she'd been told, back toward the street. The drive to the warehouse was a blur of silent, terrifying speed. They were in an armored black SUV, Luca at the wheel, driving with a controlled recklessness that pressed Emma back into her seat. Gino was in the passenger seat, his arm now in a makeshift sling from a graze, the wound a stark reminder of the stakes. They screeched to a halt in a gravel lot overlooking a massive, decaying industrial park. The target was a huge, corrugated steel warehouse at the far end, its windows dark and broken. Luca cut the engine. The silence was absolute. He turned to Emma, his face a mask of stone. "You did good, Emma. You did perfect. Now you stay in this car, you lock the doors, you do not move until I come back for you. That is not a request. That is an order. Luca, do you understand me?" he demanded, his voice raw. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He, Gino, Dante, and Matteo moved out, melting into the shadows of the industrial park like ghosts. Emma sat in the SUV, her hands locked together. She counted to 30. The silence was agonizing. She thought of Mrs. Moretti, alone in that dark building, terrified. She thought of Luca, walking into a trap. He had ordered her to stay. He had ordered her to be safe, but he didn't understand. She wasn't just a weakness to be protected. She was a partner. She opened the door and slipped out of the SUV. She ran, staying low, darting between rusted oil drums and stacks of rotting pallets. The warehouse was silent, too silent. Then, the night exploded. It wasn't a loud shootout. It was a series of muffled, professional thwacks from silenced weapons. She heard men shout, a cry of pain. She saw muzzle flashes from the upper windows of the warehouse. She ducked behind a stack of concrete barriers, her heart pounding. She saw Gino stumble, clutching his good arm. He was hit again, but it was just a graze on his shoulder. He ducked behind a truck, returning fire. The main firefight was at the front. Emma saw a side door, a small, rusted metal entrance, hanging slightly ajar. She didn't think. She just ran for it. She slipped inside. The warehouse was vast, a cavern of shadows and scaffolding. The air smelled of rust, oil, and fear. The shootout was distant now, a dull pop, pop, pop from the front. She heard a different sound from a large, open bay to her left, the thud of flesh hitting flesh, grunts of effort. She peered around a steel girder. It was Luca. He was in a brutal, desperate fistfight with Curtis Lyle. Curtis, his face a landscape of old and new bruises, was fighting with a wild, sloppy rage, a knife in his hand. Luca was unarmed, his movements precise, economical and lethal. Curtis lunged, screaming. Luca sidestepped, caught his wrist, and twisted. The sound of a bone snapping was sickeningly sharp. The knife clattered. Curtis howled, but Luca didn't stop. He delivered a series of rapid, devastating blows to Curtis's ribs and face. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Luca slammed his fist into Curtis's temple, and the man crumpled, unconscious before he hit the concrete. Luca stood over him, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling. He was a creature of pure, cold violence. He hadn't seen her. Emma backed away, her stomach turning. This was his world. This was what it took to survive. She turned from the fight and pushed deeper into the warehouse. "Mrs. Moretti," she whispered, her voice lost in the huge space. She found a row of small, dark offices. One door was locked. She heard a faint sound from inside, a whimper. "Mrs. Moretti, it's me, Emma." She threw her shoulder against the flimsy door. The lock splintered. She was there, tied to a metal chair, a dirty rag stuffed in her mouth as a gag. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Oh, God, Mrs. M." Emma rushed forward, her hands fumbling with the ropes. They were tight, biting into the older woman's fragile wrists. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm getting you out," Emma soothed, finally pulling the gag from her mouth. "Emma." "Mrs." Moretti gasped, her voice hoarse. "My son, Luca, they said that they were going to kill him." "He's here," Emma said, pulling the last rope free. "He's safe. We're all safe. We have to go." She helped the frail woman to her feet just as a new sound filled the air. A low, hungry whoosh. A flickering orange light began to grow from the front of the warehouse. "Fire!" a man yelled. "The whole place is going up!" The shootout must have ruptured a fuel line or overturned a lantern. Smoke began to curl along the high ceiling. "We have to go! Now!" Emma grabbed Mrs. Moretti's hand and pulled her toward the side door. They burst out into the night air, coughing, their lungs burning from the smoke. The shootout had stopped. The night was filled with the roar of the fire and the distant wail of sirens. Luca was standing by the truck, his gun down, his head turning, scanning the chaos. His eyes, frantic, were searching for one thing. Then he saw her. He saw her emerge from the smoke, supporting his mother. The cold killer, the mafia boss, the tactical commander, it all shattered. He didn't run. He crossed the distance in 3 long, desperate strides. He ignored his mother, his men, the fire. He had eyes only for Emma. He pulled her out of his mother's grasp and into his arms, crushing her against him. His embrace was not tender. It was a violent, desperate act of possession, as if he were trying to merge them into one, to physically guarantee she was real, that she was alive. He didn't kiss her. He buried his face in her hair, his entire body shaking with a relief so profound it was indistinguishable from agony. He pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes squeezed shut, his knuckles white where he gripped her arms. "Emma," he whispered, his voice broken. He just said her name, over and over. "Emma, Emma." Gino, his arm bandaged by Dante, pulled the SUV around, the headlights cutting through the smoke. Luca, his composure returning, finally looked at his mother, his eyes full of a decade of pain and regret. He helped her into the back seat, then pulled Emma in beside her, never letting go of her hand. They drove for an hour, leaving the city, the sirens, and the burning warehouse behind. They drove until the gray smog of Clearwater Heights was replaced by the deep black of the countryside. They arrived at a high, modern gate that opened silently for them. They drove up a long, dark driveway to a sprawling estate, a modern fortress of glass and dark wood, overlooking a silent valley. Later that night, after Mrs. Moretti was settled in a warm room, her hand still shaking as she clutched a cup of tea. Emma found Luca. He was standing on a stone terrace, the house dark behind him. He was staring up at the sky, which was so clear, so full of stars, it looked fake. He looked as out of place here as he had in her tiny apartment. She walked up to him, wrapping her arms around herself. The silence was deep. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice quiet, but it carried in the still night air. He didn't turn. "My men are cleaning up the mess. Curtis is alive. He'll be handed to the authorities. Sal is gone. It's over." "I don't mean them," Emma said, stepping up beside him. "I mean us. You won. You got her back. You took out your rivals. So what happens now? Do you disappear again? Go back into exile? Is that the plan?" He was silent for a long moment. The only sound, the crickets in the grass below. Then he turned to face her. The moonlight illuminated the new bruise on his jaw and the profound, aching exhaustion in his eyes. He looked at her. The woman who had run into the fire for his mother. The woman who had faced his enemy for him. He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "I can't walk away this time." The silence was the loudest thing. After the fire. After the estate. After his promise. "I can't walk away this time." Luca had vanished. He had left Emma and his mother at the fortress-like house, two women guarded by Gino and Dante. He had kissed Emma once, a hard, quick kiss that tasted of ash and finality. "I have to end this," he'd said, his voice a flat line, "for good." And then he was gone. For 3 days, the estate was a quiet, luxurious prison. On the 4th day, Gino, his arm in a fresh sling, drove Emma back to her apartment. The new, solid core door felt redundant. The neighborhood was silent. The threat was gone. She went back to the Sunset Diner. The fluorescent lights hummed the same. The coffee tasted just as burnt. The regulars still complained about the weather. But for Emma, it was like walking through a ghost's memory. The world had returned to its normal axis, but she had been fundamentally tilted. She was safe, but she was hollow. She had survived a war, but the general had disappeared. She'd asked Gino, who now sat in the corner booth, the one that had belonged to Mrs. Moretti, and then to Luca. "He's handling loose ends," Gino would say, his eyes unreadable as he stared into his coffee. "What loose ends?" "Just ends." It had been 10 days since she'd seen him. 10 days of wiping counters, pouring coffee, and walking home to an apartment that was too quiet, too secure. The fear was gone, but the adrenaline had been replaced by a deep, aching void. She had saved a life. She had walked through fire. She had fallen in love with a man who was equal parts shadow and storm, and now he was just a shadow. The morning he was pronounced dead. The diner was unusually quiet. It was a Tuesday, just after 9. The small, crackling television mounted in the corner was on, but no one was watching. And in the fallout of what authorities are calling a major dismantling of organized crime in the city, the reporter said, her voice crisp. Several high-level arrests were made last night. Emma was filling a salt shaker, her movements automatic. The arrests came after a violent confrontation at a warehouse in the industrial sector 2 weeks ago, which left the building destroyed. But the real story is what wasn't found. Emma's hands stilled. Sources say the power vacuum was created by the sudden return of Luca Moretti, a figure who had been in self-imposed exile for nearly a decade. Following an anonymous tip, authorities raided a known safe house late last night. While several gang members were apprehended, there was evidence of a significant struggle. The screen showed footage of a dark suburban house, its front door splintered. No bodies were recovered, the reporter continued. But law enforcement sources have confirmed they believe a rival faction, tied to the recently arrested Sal Minetti, cornered Moretti, Luca Moretti, who was the focus of the raid, is now officially missing and presumed dead. Emma didn't hear the sound of the glass. She just felt the sharp sting of salt in the cold, wet spray as the shaker she had just filled shattered on the floor. A regular at the counter, old Mr. Henderson looked over. "You all right, sweetheart? You look like you've seen a ghost." She was. The hollowness that had ached for 10 days suddenly collapsed inward, becoming a dense, suffocating black hole. He was gone. He hadn't just left. He had been erased. He had won the war, saved his mother, and in the end, his world had finally, permanently, caught up to him. He hadn't been handling loose ends. He had been won. She finished her shift. She didn't cry. She was too numb, too empty. She was a shell, walking and talking and pouring coffee, but she was empty. She went to the new, secure apartment where Mrs. Moretti was staying. She didn't have to say the words. The old woman saw the look on Emma's face and knew. Emma finally broke, collapsing into a chair, the sobs tearing out of her, raw and animal. Mrs. Moretti didn't cry. She sat beside Emma, stroking her hair, her eyes filled with a lifetime of sorrow, but also with a strange, deep knowing. "He's gone," Emma choked out, her voice thick. They said he's dead. They said presumed." "Mrs." Moretti corrected, her voice gentle but firm. "There is a difference, my child. It doesn't matter, he's not coming back. He's gone." "My son," Mrs. Moretti said, looking at the city skyline, "was a ghost for a very long time. He lived in the shadows. He learned how to move without being seen. Ghosts know how to disappear. Emma, and they know how to wait." But the comfort felt thin. Weeks turned into a month. The hole in her life did not heal. It simply scarred over. The raw grief faded into a dull, constant ache. She worked her doubles. She visited Mrs. Moretti, and they would talk about anything but him. She paid her rent. Life went on. Winter was settling in. The gray skies of Clearwater Heights seemed permanent. It was a cold Wednesday afternoon, the diner empty in the mid-afternoon lull. Emma was wiping down the counter when the bell on the door jingled. A man she had never seen before stood there. He wasn't a customer. He was a courier, holding a slim white envelope. "Emma Grayson." "Yes, this is for you." He handed her the envelope and left. There was no return address, just her name, written in a strong, clear hand that made her heart stop. She ripped it open, her hands trembling so violently she almost tore the contents. Inside, there was no letter. There was a deed, a legal document for a small house in a town she'd never heard of. There was a one-way plane ticket, scheduled for the next day, and underneath it all, a single, small note. It contained only 10 words. "If you still want peace, I'm building it. Come find me." He was alive. She didn't pack. She didn't call her boss. She ran to Mrs. Moretti's apartment, waving the note, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "Go," Mrs. Moretti had said, pressing Emma's hand. "Go find my son. Go find your life." The plane flew over mountains and forests, landing in a small, windswept airport where the air smelled not of smog and diners, but of pine and salt. A taxi, prearranged, drove her for an hour, down a winding coastal highway until the ocean, vast and gray and powerful, stretched out to the horizon. The cab stopped at the end of a long, gravel driveway. "This is it, miss." The house, the cabin, was small, built of dark wood, perched on a low cliff overlooking the sea. It was simple, solid, and absolutely real. She paid the driver and grabbed her small bag. She walked down the path, her heart a trapped bird in her chest, and then she saw him. He was on the deck that faced the ocean. He was not in a suit. He was not in armor. He was wearing faded jeans, a thick wool sweater, and his feet were bare against the wood. He was painting, not a masterpiece, but the deck railing, a simple, pale blue. He was just a man, painting a deck. She stopped at the edge of the grass. The sound of the wind and the waves was all she could hear. "Luca?" Her voice was a whisper, stolen by the wind. He froze. The paintbrush, loaded with blue, clattered from his hand onto the wood, spattering. He turned slowly, as if waking from a long dream. He saw her, his face, thinner than she remembered, marked with a faint scar along his jaw that was new, was a mask of disbelief, of hope, of 1,000 emotions she couldn't name. She dropped her bag. She ran across the grass, and he met her, lunging off the deck. He caught her in a collision that was not of violence, but of pure, desperate gravity. He lifted her off the ground, his arms locking around her, his face buried in her neck, and his body was shaking. He was real. He was warm. He was solid. He set her down, and his hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs wiping at tears she didn't even know she was crying. "You came," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse, as if he hadn't spoken in weeks. "You told me to," she whispered back, her hands covering his, pressing his palms to her cheeks. He kissed her. It was not the fierce, angry kiss from the alley. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss from the warehouse. It was a kiss of profound, staggering peace. It was slow and deep and quiet. It tasted of salt and wind and of a future she had never thought possible. His lips were soft, his control absolute, but it was not the control of a boss. It was the reverence of a man holding the one thing in the universe he would not, could not, ever break. They just stood there for a long time, locked together on the edge of the world, no words spoken, the only sound the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore. Months later, the bell over the door jingled, but this time it was a bright, clean chime, not a dull, tired jingle. The new diner was called The Second Chance. It was small, but the windows were huge, letting in the afternoon light. It was in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood, worlds away from the gray streets of Clearwater Heights. Emma, her hair tied back, smiled at the customer, pointing to the menu. She was the owner. She moved with an easy, confident grace. In the corner booth, the one that got the most sun, Luca sat, reading a newspaper. He wore a simple, clean shirt. He looked like any other man, handsome and quiet, enjoying his afternoon. The only hint of his past was the faint scar on his jaw, and the way his eyes constantly, softly, tracked Emma as she moved. Across from him, her hands busy with a pair of knitting needles, sat Mrs. Moretti. She was glowing, her face full of a peace that had been decades in the making. She and Luca shared a small house just a few blocks away. Luca watched Emma laugh with a customer, and a slow, soft smile touched his own lips, a smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. Emma, feeling his gaze, looked over. She smiled back and walked over. A fresh, steaming cup in her hand, she set it down in front of him. "You're spoiling me," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "You're my best customer," she teased. He captured her hand as she went to pull away, his fingers lacing with hers. He brought her knuckles to his lips, kissing them, his eyes never leaving hers. "This," he said, his voice full of a quiet, profound wonder, his gaze sweeping over the peaceful diner, his mother, and her. "This is the life I never thought I could have." Emma squeezed his hand, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She leaned in, her smile soft and sure. "Good thing you walked into my diner. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Emma and Luca. We would love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please drop a comment below and let us know. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of love and danger. And finally, what did you think of the story? We invite you to share your thoughts in English in the comments. We read every one. Thank you again.